Memphis, Tennessee, July 8, 1988. The Memphis City Council chambers on Adams Avenue were not built for comfort. They were built for procedure. The chairs in the public gallery were wooden and unpadded, arranged in rows that sloped gently toward the floor, where the council members sat behind a long curved table of dark oak. The lighting was fluorescent and unforgiving, the kind that makes everyone look slightly guilty of something. The air conditioning worked harder than it needed to, and the room was always 10 degrees colder than the street outside, which in Memphis in July meant the difference between suffocating and merely uncomfortable. A water pitcher sat at the center of the council table, beating with condensation. A clock on the wall read 7:31. Outside, Beale Street was already alive with a Friday night that had nothing to do with what was about to happen in this room. It was a Thursday evening, and the gallery was fuller than usual. Most of the people who had come were musicians, or the families of musicians, or the owners of clubs and restaurants along Beale Street whose livelihoods had grown up alongside the Memphis Blues Festival over the previous 14 years. They had come because word had spread that Item 6 on the agenda, the Memphis Blues Festival budget allocation, was not going to go the way it had gone in previous years. They were right. Councilman Gerald Pruitt was 58 years old, a careful man with careful hair, and a manner that suggested he had spent his entire adult life making sure nobody could accuse him of excess. He represented a district that was not Beale Street and did not contain many blues clubs and did not, in his considered opinion, benefit meaningfully from spending city money on what he had described in a budget committee meeting the previous week as 1 week of noise for people who mostly come from out of town anyway. He had the numbers on his side. The city's fiscal year had not been kind. The state had reduced its municipal allocations. 3 other programs were also being cut. The Blues Festival, with its 14-year history and its 30,000 annual attendees and its demonstrated economic impact on the surrounding district, was nonetheless, in the mathematics of this particular Thursday evening, a line item that could be removed. Pruitt made his motion at 7:43 p.m. He spoke for 4 minutes, citing figures, referencing the fiscal responsibility owed to taxpayers, noting that the festival had other potential funding sources it had not fully explored. He was not unkind about it. He was efficient. The vote was 4-3. In the public gallery, a woman named Dorothy Sims, who had played keyboards at the festival for 11 of its 14 years, put her face in her hands. The man beside her, a trumpet player named Carl Webb, who had driven down from Chicago for this meeting, stared at the ceiling. A restaurant owner near the back of the gallery exhaled a long breath that was not quite a word. The council moved to Item 7. Outside on Adams Avenue, the July heat was waiting. The news reached Beale Street within the hour, the way news always reaches Beale Street, through the particular telegraph of musicians talking to musicians, club owners calling club owners, the word passing from the bar at the Rum Boogie to the sidewalk outside Blues City Cafe to the loading dock behind the Orpheum, where 2 stagehands were having a cigarette. By 9 o'clock that evening, everyone on the street knew. By 10, most of them had decided there was nothing to be done. By 11, Beale Street had gone quiet in the particular way it goes quiet when something has been taken from it. 2 miles away, in a room at the Peabody Hotel, a large man in a deep royal blue jacquard-patterned silk shirt was sitting on the edge of the bed with his shoes off, watching the local news. He had a show at the Mid-South Coliseum the following evening, the 3rd night of a 4-night run that had sold out in February. His tour manager had left an hour ago. His road cases were stacked near the door, packed and ready. The news segment about the council vote lasted 90 seconds. A reporter standing outside the council chambers, the July night humid behind her. A brief clip of Pruitt citing fiscal responsibility, his voice reasonable and practiced. A shot of Beale Street at night. The neon signs, the people on the sidewalk, the street that had been making music since before any of these council members were born. A musician interviewed on the sidewalk, a young man with a trumpet case over his shoulder, who said quietly that he didn't know what they were going to do. That they'd figure something out. That the music didn't stop just because a budget line did. B.B. King watched the segment twice. The second time because the station ran it again at the top of the 11 o'clock hour, and because the second time through he was listening more carefully to what the young trumpet player had said. Then he turned the television off and sat in the quiet of the hotel room for a long while. He thought about 1949. He had been 23 years old, playing for tips on Beale Street with a borrowed guitar, sleeping on the floor of a room on Vance Avenue, eating when the tips were good enough and not eating when they weren't. He had played that street in the years when nobody called it historic, when it was just where the music was because that was where the people were who needed it. Working people, tired people, people who had come up from the Delta and needed to hear something that understood where they had been. He had played it when it was loud and when it was quiet and when it smelled of the river and when it smelled of something less pleasant. He had played it in rain and in the specific dense heat of a Memphis August that sits on you like a hand. It was his street, in the way that the place where you become yourself is always your street, regardless of what your address says or what a council vote decides. He picked up the phone. He called his road manager, Jimmy, who answered on the second ring with the wary alertness of someone who has worked with musicians long enough to know that late calls mean changed plans. "I need tomorrow morning free," BB said. Jimmy asked about the sound check. "Push it to 4, BB said. "I need the morning." He hung up. He sat for a while longer. Then he picked up Lucille from her stand beside the window. The pitch-black Gibson ES 355, her gold hardware catching the light from the bedside lamp, and played quietly, sitting on the edge of the bed, just for himself. Not practicing, not warming up, just the way you hold a conversation with something you trust when you are working something out. He played for an hour. Then he set Lucille back and went to sleep. He was on Beale Street at 7 in the morning. The street was empty at that hour, genuinely empty. The bars shuttered, the souvenir shops locked, the famous neon signs dark in the early morning. A delivery truck at the far end. A man hosing down the sidewalk outside a restaurant, the morning light coming in low and golden from the east, hitting the wet bricks and turning them the color of old copper. BB walked slowly. He had left the guitar case at the hotel. He walked with his hands in his pockets, looking at the street the way you look at something you have known long enough to see what other people miss. He stopped in front of the spot where he had played in 1949. It was a club entrance now, locked and dark. He stood there for a moment. Then he walked back to the hotel and picked up Lucille. He was back on Beale Street by 8:15. He found a spot on the sidewalk in front of a closed souvenir shop, halfway down the block, where the morning light was good. He set the case down, opened it, took out Lucille, and sat on the case itself, the way he had sat on plenty of things over the years when there was no chair available. He plugged nothing in, no amp, no microphone, no sound system, just the guitar and the morning and the empty street. He began to play. He played the blues in E, slow and easy, the way the morning required. The sound was small without amplification, intimate, the way music sounds when it is not trying to reach anyone in particular, but is simply present in the air. The wet bricks absorbed some of it. The rest went up into the July morning and disappeared. For the first 15 minutes, nobody stopped. The delivery truck finished its business and drove away. The man with the hose went back inside. A woman walked past on the far sidewalk without looking over. BB played on. At 8:32, a man named Robert, who ran a music shop 2 blocks over, came down the street on his way to open up and stopped when he heard the guitar from half a block away. He stood on the sidewalk and listened for a moment, his keys in his hand. Then he crossed the street and stood closer. He recognized the sound before he recognized the face, the particular quality of the vibrato, the way each note bent at its peak and held there, trembling, unwilling to simply end. Then he looked at the face. He recognized both. He did not say anything. He did not take out a camera. He did not run to make a phone call. He simply stood on the sidewalk on Beale Street at 8:32 in the morning and listened to B.B. King play the blues without an amplifier in the July light, and felt something in his chest that he would spend years trying to describe to people who hadn't been there. At 8:47, Dorothy Sims, the keyboard player from the council meeting the night before, who had not slept more than 2 hours and was walking to clear her head because her apartment had started to feel like a room where a decision had been made about her life, came around the corner from 3rd Street and stopped so suddenly that the woman behind her walked into her shoulder. By 9 o'clock, there were 11 people on the sidewalk. By 9:15, there were 30. Nobody had announced anything. Nobody had put anything on the radio or called the newspaper. The sound had traveled the way sound travels in an empty city in the early morning, farther than it should, finding its way around corners and through open windows and into the ears of people who were not looking for it but recognized it when it arrived. By 9:30, Beale Street had people on it who had not been up before 9 on a weekday in years. A woman brought a folding chair from inside her restaurant and set it on the sidewalk, not for herself, but as an offering in case the man playing wanted it. He didn't use it, but he nodded at her when she set it down. A trumpet player took his instrument out of its case and stood at the edge of the gathering and waited until he found a place in what BB was playing and then quietly joined it. BB heard him, adjusted slightly, gave him room. A guitarist, then a drummer who had a practice pad but no kit, keeping time with brushes on the side of a cardboard box. By 10 o'clock, there were 200 people on Beale Street, and the number was still growing. Nobody was going anywhere. The shop owners who had come to open up had opened their doors but not gone inside. A city bus stopped at the corner, and 3 of the passengers got off to see what was happening, and none of them got back on. A television news van from the local CBS affiliate pulled up at 10:17. The reporter, a young woman named Karen who had been sent to cover a ribbon cutting 3 blocks away, looked at the crowd and called her producer and said she thought they might want to redirect her. By 11 o'clock, the crowd was somewhere between 800 and 1,000 people, stretching from the souvenir shop where BB had started all the way to the corner. People were standing on parked cars. A man had climbed the fire escape of the building across the street for a better view. 3 more musicians had joined, a bass player, another guitarist, a harmonica player who had run home to get his instrument when he heard what was happening. B.B. King played for 3 hours and 40 minutes without stopping, except once to retune Lucille, and once to accept a bottle of water from a woman in the crowd who passed it through the people in front of her until it reached him. At 11:53, a city council aide named Marcus Bird pushed through the crowd until he could see what was happening. He stood and watched for a few minutes. Then he took out a quarter and found a payphone. Councilman Gerald Pruitt arrived at 12:20 in a city car. He stood at the edge of the crowd for a long time, not pushing forward, just watching. 1,000 people on Beale Street on a Friday morning in July, around a man sitting on a guitar case playing the blues without an amplifier. The television camera found Pruitt, and he knew it had found him, and he stood with his hands at his sides and watched. BB played the last phrase of what he was playing, held the final note, let it fade. Silence for a moment. Then the crowd, 1,000 people on Beale Street at noon on a Friday, made a sound that went up over the buildings and out toward the river. Pruitt made his way to where BB was sitting on the guitar case. BB looked up at him. He did not stand. He did not need to. "Mr. King," Pruitt said. His voice was different from the voice in the council chambers the night before. The efficiency was gone. Something else was in its place. Not quite humility, but the precursor to it, the moment before a careful man decides to stop being careful about the wrong things. "Councilman," BB said. He looked at Pruitt the way he had looked at the street all morning, without judgment, without performance, just steadily and with full attention. Pruitt looked at the crowd around them. 1,000 people on Beale Street at noon on a Friday in July. He looked at the television camera that had found both of them. He looked at the street itself, the wet bricks drying in the sun, the neon signs dark but present, the buildings that had been here since before either of them was born, that would be here after both of them were gone. He was a careful man, and he was being careful now, but careful about something different than he had been careful about the night before. "I think," Pruitt said slowly, weighing each word the way he weighed all words, "we may need to revisit last night's vote." BB nodded once. "I think that would be the right thing to do," he said. Pruitt nodded. He looked at the crowd one more time, at Dorothy Sims near the edge, at Robert from the music shop, at the trumpet player and the drummer with the cardboard box, at all the people who had simply followed a sound to where it was coming from and stayed. "How long have you been out here?" "Since 8:15, BB said. Pruitt's jaw moved slightly. "You didn't have to do that." BB looked at him with the patient, unhurried eyes of a man who has 63 years of mornings behind him, who has played music in rooms where nobody wanted him and rooms where everybody did, who has been moved along and ignored and celebrated and forgotten and celebrated again. "Yes, I did," he said simply. "This is my street, too." He picked up Lucille and put her back in the case. He closed the latches. He stood slowly and picked up the case. The crowd parted for him as he walked back toward the Peabody. People touched his shoulder as he passed. A child held up a hand, and he touched it with 2 fingers. Someone said thank you, and he nodded without stopping. At the edge of the crowd, Dorothy Sims was standing with her hands clasped in front of her, eyes bright. He stopped beside her. "Next year," he said. "I'll be there." She couldn't answer. She nodded. He walked back to the Peabody Hotel through the July heat, Lucille's case in his hand. He had a sound check at 4. Tonight, he would play for 12,000 people. This morning, he had played for 1 street. Both mattered equally. They always had. The Memphis City Council held an emergency session 4 days later, on Tuesday, July 12th. The vote to restore the Blues Festival budget allocation was 5-2. Councilman Pruitt voted with the majority. The Memphis Blues Festival ran the following summer and the summer after that, and has run every summer since. It grew. It is still running. Every year, in the program printed for the festival, there is a note on the back page. It has been there since 1989. It reads, "In memory of a Friday morning in July 1988 when the music refused to stop." No name is attached. Everyone who needs to know, knows. If there has ever been a moment when someone stood up for something that mattered, not with words, but with action, with presence, with showing up, drop it in the comments. I read every one. And which B.B. King song do you keep coming back to? When I'm on that stage, I give everything I have, because somebody out there needs it. B.B. King.